Welcome to Open Minds Radio with Alejandro Rojas. Open Minds Radio is your UFO news authority, presenting evidence and the latest news regarding the UFO phenomenon. Here's your host, Alejandro Rojas.
Alejandro Rojas, that sounds like a familiar name. Oh, that's me! Hey, it's me, Alejandro Rojas, your host of Open Minds Radio. And we have the most spectacular show today. It's absolutely amazing. This guy is named Antonio Huneeus, and you may know him from Open Minds magazine and from the Open Minds website because he writes these incredible stories about UFOs, and we're going to be talking about some of his most recent ones, including UFO sighting by an ex-president of Mexico. It's a really neat story because, I mean, he was not shy. I forget, Antonio will tell us the details, but he was like, he'd be in meetings, and if people talked about UFOs, he'd be like, oh, yeah, I saw a UFO. So that's kind of cool. Like a Nobel Peace Prize winner who also wrote about UFOs. And then who is the other one? Oh, 2012 and the Mexico thing. Jason and I have talked about that quite a bit, but Antonio also did some research on some of that, so we'll talk about that. So there is a lot to... He's also just got back, actually, from a couple conferences on the East Coast, too.
He also used to wrestle dinosaurs. He's that old.
Wrestle dinosaurs. So we'll ask him what his favorite dinosaur to wrestle might have been. I'm going to guess it would be... I have no idea, actually.
It's a good question for him.
The Brontosaurus. He'd grab its neck and say, and he would say, oh, I just wrestled the Brontosaurus, even though the Brontosaurus didn't know. No, he's not that old. He is up there, but that's kind of mean. That was Jason in the peanut gallery there, and that wasn't me. So some of you are like, hey, man, don't make fun of Antonio. That was Jason.
I proudly accept that blame. I love to give him a hard time.
Yeah. So we have a great show today. We're going to be talking about all of that fun stuff. And I'm actually in the studio again because I told you that we had this great plan about doing some more remote stuff. And that worked beautifully, didn't it? Not. So, of course, but we're able to recover the great interview last week that Peter Robbins had where he talked about Bud Hopkins. And if you were one of the people who listened live and, it was kind of choppy or something, go hook up to your iTunes again and it'll upload the new podcast where you'll be able to see the interview, hear the interview with Peter, and it sounds great. So just in case you're one of those people, I think most of you podcast later on, so most of you heard the one that we already edited and sounded pretty all right. So that is the show today. I'm very excited. But guess what comes up first? The news, UFO news, because on openminds.tv, you always have the latest news. Also, I'm tweeting that on UFO Daily News, at UFO Daily News on Twitter if you want a Twitter news feed. But we bring this character in called Jason McClellan, and he comes in and tells us all about the news, and we have fun talking about the latest and the greatest. So we've got him here with us right now. You heard him making fun of Antonio. Jason McClellan, how are you?
I'm great, sir. Yes, that is one of my many jobs is peanut gallery. I do fill in on that before the news comes in. But this is your Open Minds news brief for Monday, November 14th, 2011. An aircraft carrier-sized asteroid known as Asteroid 2005 YU-55 recently passed between the Moon and Earth, making its closest pass to our planet in 200 years. According to NASA, strange structures were detected on the large asteroid as it passed Earth at an impressive 30,000 miles per hour. According to the BBC, 2 radio telescopes, the Goldstone Observatory in California and the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico.
Arecibo is what Americans call it.
But it's in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, but you can't say it right anyway, so.
So are you telling me, as a
Arecibo
new resident of Arizona, you say Casa Grande?
No.
What do you say then?
Casa Grande.
There you go. Anyway, These two observatories, these two radio telescopes, recorded radio echoes off the asteroid, quote, to understand better what it is made of and how it is shaped. Scientists at the Goldstone Observatory assembled a short video of the asteroid using images generated from data acquired with the 230-foot wide Deep Space Network antenna on November 7, 2011, between 11:24 a.m. and 1:35 p.m. The images used to create this video are reportedly the highest resolution images ever made by radar of a near-Earth object. And while that sounds impressive, Alejandro, I was underimpressed by these images. I know I should be really impressed, but it's very grainy and hard to make out anything. However, NASA reports that the principal investigator for asteroid 2005 YU-55 observations, radar astronomer Lance Benner of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, stated about the video, quote, "The animation reveals a number of puzzling structures on the surface that we don't yet understand." He further stated, quote, "To date, we've seen less than one half of the surface, so we expect more surprises." This sounds like a becoming more typical response of NASA to try to hype things up.
Yeah, exactly. Marketing.
Exactly. So, are these structures evidence of an extraterrestrial civilization? Some think so, while others think the usage of the term structures in this instance simply refers to anomalies on the asteroid's surface. In either case, these structures have scientists puzzled, and their identity is unknown.
Interesting.
It is interesting. And I wonder how intentional the usage of the term structure actually was. And maybe a year ago, I might have not even thought twice about it. I would just say they're just talking about something weird on the surface. Could be a mountain or something, but they don't know what it is. However, we've seen a lot, on multiple occasions this year. We've seen NASA really playing with words a lot. Intentional playing with words to create a buzz.
Because what else? Let's think of what words you would use. Let's say we lived on the moon and we took pictures of, just because I was there fairly recently, Arches National Park or Monument Valley, and you would see some weird geological structures. So that might be the term you would use. What else would you use? Some strange formations. Geological formations would be one. But I think you're totally right, because we know, like they did recently, not too long ago, they made the big deal about the extraterrestrial life, and it was total BS. It had nothing to do with
talking about the organisms that could live in an arsenic-heavy environment.
Yeah.
And the press release they sent out, and they bothered to send out a press release, and the press release was very vague and simply stated that they were going to make an announcement that would impact the search for extraterrestrial life.
Yeah. And it was a marketing play.
And it worked.
I think you're right. I think you're probably
They're doing
right.
this more and more. They're really playing the game. They really want to get people interested in space again, and this is the angle they're taking. They know that people are interested in extraterrestrial life, so they really hype this up.
Yeah.
And the recent discovery of the planet they're calling Tatooine, that has the 2 moons, they really hyped that one up.
Yeah.
Playing with Star Wars.
Right.
And they had somebody from Industrial Light and Magic on that panel to discuss the announcement of that.
Right.
So NASA's playing a lot of games with their PR now.
Yeah.
And it's I guess it's working for them. They're definitely getting the headlines with it.
Yeah.
Well, on talking about the phrasing of that, the usage of the word structure, we have more strange structures today. Gizmodo reporter Jesus. My microphone keeps clicking.
Yeah, now it's good.
And I apologize to our listeners. I know it's annoying, but it's also annoying to Alejandro and myself because it's very loud in our ears. But Gizmodo reporter Jesus Diaz published a story on Saturday, November 13th, about multiple mysterious formations in the Chinese desert. The strange surface features and mysterious structures are visible using Google Maps. The first oddity pointed out by Diaz is a series of wide white lines. This formation reportedly covers an area approximately 1 mile long by more than 3,000 feet wide. Diaz mentions that the, quote, tracks are perfectly executed and they seem to be designed to be seen from orbit, end quote. He goes on to speculate, quote, perhaps it's some kind of targeting or calibrating grid for Chinese spy satellites? Maybe it's a QR code for aliens. Nobody really knows, end quote. Another similar pattern of lines is located approximately 20 miles west of the first pattern. And Alejandro, these lines that he mentions in the article, these are just a couple of the strange formations that appear within a relatively close area in China. There are many more that appear to be perhaps coded signals, coded patterns that, viewed from space, could translate to something.
Have you tried to scan them with your iPhone and the little application?
I haven't, because that app is specifically geared to QR codes. These don't appear to be QR codes.
You never know. It might say China rules or something.
I'll give it a try. But in some of these patterns, Alejandro, the interesting thing is when you zoom in, you can see that there are like vehicles that are blown up, like scorched vehicles and things like that. So it could indicate that, some sort of space-based weaponry testing is taking place there in these targets.
Or not necessarily space-based. It could be just artillery or other type of missile testing and stuff like that.
It certainly could be. And, that the vehicles there and the indication of scorching, of things being blown up, that's interesting. And then there's also one feature that looks like it could be perhaps an airfield, a couple of runways or something. But one of the things that could be a runway is really illuminated. It's very, very vividly blue and very, you can see it from space very clearly. And, a lot of times that indicates that you're looking at water. Water looks really weird from above. But when you really zoom in on it, it appears that you can see segments of perhaps some material that makes up this runway. It's like a long tile or something, but on a much larger scale. So who knows? I mean, you can speculate that it could be a runway that's made to be extremely visible from the air, which could lead you to then say, is it for UFOs, for spacecraft to be able to easily identify it coming from the sky? Who knows? Yeah. That's a stretch. I mean, that's just pure speculation. However, at the top of one of these runways, there's this big square on the ground. This is the same color of the runway. It seems to be attached to this runway, if it is runway. And there are lots of holes, not really holes, but circular areas that appear to have been blasted with like a laser, or some sort of explosion happened there. You see tons of these holes, and some of them do show signs of what could be scorching, or where something had blown up. And they're just littered all over the place. So if this is a runway of some sort, either they have terrible pilots there who are crashing all the time, or something is being blown up there.
Well, if you go look at Kirtland Air Force Base in the Manzano Mountains, you'll see all kinds of weird stuff that we have. They're secret projects, and they look so strange because they do stuff like they do some laser testing, even if White Sands. Wherever they blow up bombs, they also have strange shapes for tracking, so they know how far the bombs went and stuff. But it's hard to say with some of this stuff. Like, that's one of my favorite things to do, is just go over by Kirtland Air Force Base out into the mountains, and you look at all of the weird stuff that they have there and how strange it is. Like the laser testing lab they have out there is circular. It's really weird. They have this giant wooden structure, and you can't tell what it is from a satellite image, and it's for testing radiation on planes, where they'll have a plane there, and then there's radiation, and there's lots of pocked bomb areas. So
right.
Who knows what the heck they could be testing out there. But all of the testing facilities and the proving grounds usually have some really cool stuff to look at from space.
Well, everything looks so bizarre from space, and then zooming down on it. I mean, this is a view that we're not used to seeing.
But those patterns that you were talking about at first, it's funny because they look like modern art or something. Well, not modern, 70s, but they look like 70s artwork or something.
Right. And I mean, when you fly in an airplane now and you look out the window, you do see a lot of lines and things that look weird from the air. Yeah. And you're like, what is that?
That reminds me of a harrowing story.
A harrowing story?
Yeah.
Well, you can't tease. You must share.
Yeah, I wanted to share this with the listeners anyway because I
Please do.
think I almost died.
Yes, you
yesterday.
need to share this story.
So I'm landing in Phoenix, and I'm coming from Grand Junction, and it's a propeller plane, one of the bigger ones where it seats 4 across, but it's a propeller plane. We're coming in for a landing, and all of a sudden the plane takes a hard left where we kept turning and turning and turning, and I thought we were going to flip all the way upside down. I mean, we kept going, and then finally he flipped hard right where we just went the opposite direction before centering out and then coming in for the landing. But it was over the city where this happened, because when he leveled out, then you could start to see the Salt River, and we flew right over this building right here, so I could see the building and the ASU stadium. Then I knew we were gonna land, but it was the freakiest thing. I've done a lot of flying and a lot of traveling. I used to travel for work. I've never had anything like that happen.
So did another airplane almost hit you?
We don't know. We asked the stewardess, and she wouldn't tell us. She said, I don't know. She said, but that's what she suggested. She said we might have needed to avoid another plane, but I don't know what the protocol is. Maybe she's not supposed to go ask, because it didn't appear like she did. But one of the pilots, when they opened the door, you could see he was pretty flustered and freaked out. So I'm hoping somehow maybe I can give him a call and find out what happened. But I'm glad you mentioned an airplane so I could share
I'm
my
glad
story.
you remembered to tell that story. That's pretty freaky, but
Yeah,
I'm glad you made it back here.
I made it.
All right.
And then my poor dog, it was the first time she'd flown, and because I had her with me, and
Yeah, she's not going to want to fly again.
she was pretty upset.
That's a
with me,
bad
I'm
first
sure.
experience.
Yeah.
Jeez. Well, Alejandro, here's a story that I definitely want to squeeze in here. So, our good friend Lee Spiegel of the Huffington Post reported that NBC cameraman R.D. Willis contacted him after seeing the buzz and confusion created by the New Orleans UFO video. Many of you are familiar with that video that made lots of headlines. It was a video that was shot during an NFL football game and outside the stadium. When NBC returned from a commercial, they showed this footage, and there were at least 3 lights that zipped behind a cathedral. And so that got people buzzing about UFOs in this video. And we talked about this a little last week, and while most of our conversation was garbled, I hope some people heard us talking about it.
Yeah.
But, when we looked at the video, we could tell that it was a time-lapse video, and that's something that a lot of people writing about this
When you looked at it,
video, well, I'll say we.
that was a good call.
It was definitely a time-lapse video.
Yeah.
And when you have a time-lapse video, then it's less mysterious.
Yeah.
Because the thing that was super weird about this video is these objects zipping by through the sky really
Right.
fast. And going frame by frame, you could see they were flying behind the cathedral, which meant they weren't bugs flying close to the screen
Right.
or close to the lens. So just with that alone, you think, wow, we've got these big objects zipping through the sky. That's pretty freaky. But then with the time-lapse video, you know that the objects were moving considerably slower in real time. So with that, the cameraman, R.D. Willis, was actually the photographer who shot the footage that we see in that video, and he contacted Lee Spiegel at the Huffington Post because he saw all this buzz and people being confused about the video. So he contacted Lee to clear up the confusion. And he said, if you watch Sunday Night Football on a regular basis, you will recognize my time-lapse videos throughout the telecast. He pretty much goes around to, I believe it's Sunday Night Football, and every Sunday Night Football, he takes his camera rig and sets up and does these shots for the NFL, for NBC. And it's very common in sports. If you watch sports, you'll notice this, and you pay attention.
Well,
when they come back, it gives it sort of a cinematic effect.
Yeah.
It's a very, very showy to do these time-lapse things when they come back from commercials.
And it was good of you to notice that it was time-lapse, because usually with time-lapse, they're showing the weather, the sunset,
Right,
or maybe
it's
when
big in weather.
clouds come in,
Right.
and the clouds come in, even during the games, to show you how nice it's been, or the clouds coming in during the game.
Yeah.
But it was just night. So that's, I think, why it was hard to tell it was time-lapse, because why would you time-lapse night?
Well, and with his particular setup and the way he does it, it is so cool and different because of the process he does. If you watch the video, it's kind of confusing because you see this dolly shot where the camera's actually moving as the time lapse is taking place. And so even our producer here, Tom Ruffin, when we watched the video together, wow, I wonder how he did that. It had to be a pretty elaborate setup. And so what this photographer, R.D. Willis, told Lee Spiegel is that, quote, I move and manipulate my Nikon still DSLR camera with a computer-controlled pan head and dolly. This technique makes my time-lapse video motion seem more like real-time motion when in fact they are a series of still images played back very quickly. And he even provided Lee with a video showing his setup and how it works. It's very cool. He's got this still camera on a dolly on this track, and it moves, and it's controlled completely by computer. And that 30 seconds of footage that we see in that video actually took him more than an hour to complete.
Wow.
So, addressing the UFOs captured in his video, Willis told the Huffington Post, quote, the flying rods that are seen are actually single airplanes that happen to fly through the screen during each long shutter exposure. Because of the precise, repetitive nature of my camera support rig, one plane pass seems eerily like a UFO streaking through the sky. So, as he was shooting this footage, he was watching the airplanes come in for a landing. So he knew without a doubt that they were airplanes, commercial airlines coming in for a landing at the nearby airport. And so, unfortunately, this new information should put to rest any question about what the mysterious lights were, but there are sure to be those who refuse to accept the airplane explanation.
Yeah, that was funny because when Lee forwarded me that story, he wrote something like, unfortunately, some people might get mad because I'm showing what this really is, but you just, when you're searching for the truth, you got to share the truth.
Yeah.
Which I agree with him 100% there, and it was really cool of the photographer to get a hold of him.
It really was, and he provided Lee with the original footage he shot too, so it didn't have the network's advertisement popping up, so you could see the whole video straight through. So that paired with the video of how his camera rig operates, gave Lee the full story and wanted to really help people understand what they were seeing.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, it was great, and it was great for Lee Spiegel to let us know about that story as well. And Alejandro, I want to touch on one more story. The story is a little old, but we didn't get a chance to get to it last week, and I thought this one was kind of fun. But 3 Scottish kids were shocked when they saw a UFO on October 12th. The 3 boys were near Bridgen Court in Dingwall, Scotland, at approximately 7:30 p.m. that Wednesday night when they noticed a UFO above the trees that was, quote, quite big in size, but it wasn't going very fast. Cody McKenzie, one of the boys who witnessed the UFO, told the Rossshire Journal, quote, we were sitting down on the curb when we heard this loud humming noise. We looked up and saw the UFO just above the trees. I thought it was a UFO right away. It was shaped like one and had colored lights turning round and round underneath it. We didn't see anyone in it, but the lower part of it was a silver color. You could tell that because the lights were reflecting on it. Cody also claims that he, his brother Keelan, and a friend also saw black helicopters in the sky at the same time they saw the UFO. Cody describes hearing another UFO in the area, but he never saw that one. The boys say they were frightened by the mysterious object and feared it might land, so they quickly returned home. According to the Rossshire Journal, a Northern Constabulary spokesman in Dingwall said police had, quote, received no report of unexplained activity at that time. But Cody and the other kids know what they saw that night. And Cody even created a sketch of the UFO to show his parents. Did this cool little, typical kid drawing of a UFO and crayon. But they were genuinely frightened when they saw this thing in the sky, and they ran home.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
You know what? Before you're done, though, I wanted to ask about a couple other stories I don't think we were able to, because I don't think we were able to get to before that are really interesting.
I'm not prepared, so I say no.
Yeah, you can do it.
Go ahead.
You're always prepared.
Go ahead.
The Robin Leach one.
I don't know
Speaking
anything about
Lee
that.
Spiegel.
I'm a poor fellow, so I don't know anything about that story.
You were telling me about
I'm
that
not
one.
rich nor famous. You want to get to that one?
Yeah, just if you could share, because that was kind of a cool story, if you could share with the listeners.
Absolutely. See, I'm prepared for that one, Alejandro. Thanks, buddy. Well, Robin Leach, a show business journalist who is well known for his 11-year TV series, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, is fascinated by mysterious phenomena, including UFOs. As he explained to the Huffington Post, it's something that's interested me from way back when in England as a newspaper reporter. Again, journalist Lee Spiegel recently interviewed Leach about his interest in UFOs. Spiegel revealed that he and Leach are actually good friends, and the two even went UFO hunting together in Maine back in the 70s. When asked if he had talked to many celebrities about UFOs, Leach explained that he hadn't really ever brought up this subject with any celebrities for fear of being considered, quote, weird and mad. But he continued, quote, but we do know that over the years, everybody from presidents of the United States to major dignitaries around the world, and certainly some of our NASA space boys, they have claimed to have seen and photographed unexplained flying objects or phenomena. Commenting on his friendship with Spiegel, Leach paid Spiegel the tremendous compliment of calling him the leading expert in America on unexplained phenomena.
Wow, cool.
Pretty big stuff.
I'm going to try. Robin Leach, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
I'm glad
How
you
was
went
that?
there. I wasn't going to do it, but but you frequently try to pull out your Nick Pope, so.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. I think it's cool, and what's cool is Lee's story, because he has the video of him talking with Robin Leach, and it's just kind of in a conference room.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a cool story. It's kind of cool to see that.
Yeah, old buddies talking about their old UFO hunting days.
Yeah. And it's cool to see so many celebrities coming out and talking about UFOs and stuff. And I wrote a story recently on the celebrities tweeting UFOs. Although I think, I wrote Billy Ray Cyrus, Demi Lovato, and Posh Spice. What's her real name?
It's Posh Spice.
It's Beckham, Victoria Beckham.
Correct.
All tweeting UFO sightings. Although I think that Victoria Beckham and Billy Ray were kidding.
I do too.
But I think that Demi Lovato doesn't seem like she was. Her and her friends seem to really see something over LA.
I agree with you.
There was a video,
Yeah.
and they seem like, they're giggling little girls out having fun. But
well, I think they were giggling because the reporter seemed to really be hounding them. He seemed
Yeah.
kind of like a creepy dude. But
yeah, so that was kind of real. But it's kind of neat. We've had other celebrities recently where there's no bones about it.
Right.
I saw a UFO, and they're being very clear. So that's why I really like that story.
well, there was.
And Robin Leach.
on the,
Everybody used to watch him.
I certainly did. Good old
Yeah.
80s.
Yeah.
But in today's episode of the Open Minds Update with Maureen Ellsbury, she mentioned that,
know that chick.
Jimmy Kimmel recently commented on UFOs on his show.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
He
He
said
wanted Obama
He
to-
said if he were elected president, the first thing he would do is march into the White House and demand to see everything about UFOs.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot again. The Royal Society.
Sorry, I've got nothing new there.
That's a great story, but I mean, I don't think we talked about it.
We didn't talk about it, and that's interesting. The Royal Society has sort of followed suit with like the FBI and
CIA and
CIA and the UK.
yeah, the Ministry of Defense.
There you go. With putting their journal archives online, free access. Typically, their content has been paid access only, and unfortunately, that still applies for newer publications. But stuff where the copyright has expired, so things that are 70 years or older are now available free of charge. So you can go back and read about Ben Franklin flying his kite and things way back. I mean, all of our greatest minds pretty much have been members of the Royal Society. So there are some fascinating, really ancient documents there that you can read that were published in one of the Royal Society's journals.
Yeah.
But the Royal Society historically has very openly published articles about extraterrestrial life.
No.
And that's been more so recently, in recent times, with Ted Peters about religion and the effects extraterrestrial life has on religion.
Yep.
We
We had him on the show. He was great.
And Paul Davies has been a key presenter at the Royal Society conferences.
Yeah, they've done astrobiological conferences lately. I know Nick Pope was really excited. And Nick Pope, who went to them, said that the scientists were more open and he said he didn't want to name names, but there were scientists open
That's
to the
right,
idea
that
of
was that
UFOs
conference.
behind the scenes,
Right.
you know, during lunch, but they didn't want to talk about this stuff publicly.
Right, and I think he talked about that on this show.
Yeah.
It was very
And the
cool.
Royal Society, for people who don't know, a very old and prestigious scientific organization in the United Kingdom.
Absolutely,
Now,
yeah.
more
Of which
older-
Stephen Hawking is a member, and,
Yeah.
and several
I
other
wonder if they're
contemporary
more
minds.
prestigious than the Ministry of Magic, or if the Ministry of Magic is incorporated with the Royal Society.
I'm sure it's a branch,
Yeah. The secret branch.
secret
The
branch.
secret hidden branch. Well, awesome. Those are great stories that I wanted to touch on.
Well, I'm glad you got those out, Alejandro,
Yeah.
and I'm glad I could contribute.
Yep.
All right. Well, remember, you can check out all these stories and more at openminds.tv, your source for UFO-related news. I am Jason McClellan, your Open Minds news correspondent, and you have been briefed. Back to you,
Thank
Alejandro.
Thank you for telling us all about your briefs, Jason.
My briefs are everyone's briefs.
That's great. All right. Jason is airing his briefs in public. But I wanted to touch on those stories because I think those are big, great stories in ufology, and they're real news. I mean, this is the real news. I think this is the stuff in UFO research that we need to pay attention to, and that garners more attention because they're also something that helps with the mainstream. You know, hopefully this encourages mainstream people and mainstream scientists to get more involved with this field. When you have prestigious groups such as the Royal Society looking into this, when you have Robin Leach of the Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous talking about UFOs, you know, more celebrities and stuff like that, more people feel more willing to come forward. So I love these stories. I think they're really exciting, and thank you, Jason, for sharing. And like Jason, and Lee Spiegel for his great work. Like Jason said, if you go to openminds.tv, you will see more about all of this. What else you're going to see on openminds.tv are some stories by this character named Antonio Huneeus. And this guy, you know, it comes out a little bit once in a while, but he's really got quite the sense of humor as well. He's a funny guy. So when you hear Jason teasing him, you know, we joke around a lot at the office. So, but you might have heard some little coughing in the background, and that's Antonio getting his voice ready. All right, hello, Antonio.
Hello, Alejandro.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good. Good to see you again. Good to
Yeah.
have you on the show again.
Yeah,
Let's
it's been a while.
Try this. There we go. All right. Well, we've got a lot to talk about. And maybe to start off, maybe we'll go kind of chronological in that the latest story that you wrote, and for the web, at least. And the latest one you wrote for the web was the interview with the Nobel Prize winner, Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Right.
And so maybe tell us about him.
Well, you know, he's probably among the 5 or something better known writers in the 20th century. Extremely well known writer. He's originally from Colombia, and his best known novel is 100 Years of Solitude, which is a fantastic novel. It's part of what they call the magical realism. So even in the novel itself, it has like a lot of kind of paranormal phenomena and things like that. But this is really an old interview that was done by a Spanish encyclopedia of UFOs and space in the late 60s. I believe this well, it came in installments, and it was sold in newsstands. Each week, you know, there would be a separate installment. It was about UFOs and the race for space. That was the subject. The encyclopedia was called Cíclope. And of course, in our website, we have the cover of that particular issue, and we also have the original Spanish interview with him. So they interviewed a lot in this particular issue. They had interviews with a number of people, most of whom are totally forgotten now. I guess they were mostly figures, cultural figures in Spain. Some were writers, filmmakers, actors, as well as even regular people. And like I said, I couldn't even recognize most of the names. This is back in 1969. But Garcia Marquez, of course, was already famous at that time because already the 100 Years of Solitude was published, I believe, around 67 maybe or 66, and it became an instant bestseller. but he wasn't the monumental figure that he later became, because he wrote many other famous novels. And of course, in 1982, he won the Nobel Prize in literature. So basically, he's...
And he won the Nobel Prize for that book?
But yeah, and for other books as well,
Okay.
but particularly for that book. And basically in this interview, it's a one-page interview, and they ask him, well, do you believe in UFOs? And he says, yes. I mean, in fact, he has a funny quote, and I don't have it in front of me, but he says that the kind of the absurd thing would be not to believe in UFOs. And then he also makes a couple of other interesting statements. He said they've been seen since the Knights of the Bible. So in other words, he's into ancient aliens. And then he also makes a critique of science, modern science, saying that basically science is becoming too dogmatic and too close-minded, and that it should be more visionary, like in the days of alchemy. And that's basically the gist of the interview.
Yeah.
It got. I noticed that. Funny enough, I bought that issue back in I think it was either 83 or 84. I was twice in Buenos Aires, and I remember going to an old where they were selling, used bookstores. And in Buenos Aires is a city. I bought it like at 2 a.m. where stores are still open and there's a lot of activity, nightlife activity. And I saw this couple of issues, which I wasn't familiar with, and I bought them. And so I read it all the way back, but then I forgot about it. And then what happened is a blogger.
When you bought it, did you know that it had that story in it?
Well, I probably browsed it, and
Oh, and you saw it, and that's why you bought it.
And that's why I bought it. And I bought another issue that contained some UFO cases in Argentina and elsewhere, with nice illustrations and so on. Then what happened, I kind of forgotten. It was buried in my files. And then what happened is a blogger with El Tiempo. El Tiempo is the most famous Colombian newspaper. Published it on the web, maybe about a year ago or so. And then a lot of people in the Latin, they had never been translated in English, by the way. So thanks to Open Minds, we put it in English for the first time. But a lot of Spanish blogs in Latin America did catch up. And I guess initially they thought it was a new interview, but then eventually some researchers realized that it was an old one. So we have there the complete story in English and also the original in Spanish for anybody to see.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's not new, but it is new to especially the English-speaking world because they haven't been able to read it.
They never read it.
And I don't know if, have you heard, I don't know if people have even known that he had spoken about UFOs.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Except maybe some old-time researchers who have good collections or something like that. But that's why I caught up on the web, on the Spanish blogs, because they thought, hey, everybody knows Garcia Marquez. Even if you haven't read his books, you've heard the name. He was also ambassador of Colombia, I think, to UNESCO. He's a really prominent figure. Now he's pretty old, but he's still active. And he used to write newspaper columns. Well, he was originally a journalist in the 50s. And actually, I remember I used to read some of his newspaper columns because they would be published in many Latin American newspapers. And I remember that not on UFOs, but he did touch upon paranormal or Hortian subjects. I remember one particular column he wrote about ghost hitchhikers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which I saved somewhere in my files, but I'll have to find it.
So he's definitely an open-minded
kind
of guy.
Yeah, definitely. And if you read your books, you understand why. Because his books, even though they also have a lot of social issues and historical issues about Latin America and, and economic exploitation and things like that, but they are immersed in a sort of fantastic environment. And they do have some paranormal phenomena, too, the books.
It's interesting because a lot of times these fiction writers who are great, literary figures, people assume that everything they're writing is metaphorical.
Right.
But when you look into it, a lot of times it's both. It's metaphor, but even when they're using paranormal phenomena, it's because it's something they're open to as well.
Yeah, obviously. Anything that a writer writes, even if it's fiction, it's based on something, some experience. Doesn't have to be necessarily something that he really lived, but it's something he studied or researched or read about it, or there's some reason, right, why he's putting it in a work of fiction. But the other great thing about the story is that it's great to bring up, to people who think that, only crazy people or crackpots, believe in UFOs. Well, this is a Nobel Prize winner in literature, one of the most prominent writers in the 20th century, and not just he's not even being ambiguous, saying, well, maybe UFOs exist. And he also says that he believes they're extraterrestrial, He says it just up front.
And the other thing that I love about finding stuff like this is that, just like I think we had you on before and we've talked about, or I know on Coast to Coast we talked about it, and we wrote extensively on the files that came out with the UK. Some of them new, some of them not. But just showing some of the back and forth between Lord Hill Norton and Ralph Noahs. And you find from these people who are very articulate, you find some great statements.
Right.
Like you said with Marquez, talking about how it's kind of crazy not to believe in this stuff.
Right. Yeah, and and I don't know if you discussed it with Jason in the news section, because I only caught about half of it. But our buddy, I wish he was our real buddy, but kind of our buddy, the Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, he's back on the news.
Oh, really?
Did you talk that with Jason?
No.
Yeah, what happened is a new biography was published, and it's about his early life, his early years, I guess up to the point or early in his marriage with Queen Elizabeth. And there it is, right in the introduction, his obsession practically with UFOs.
Really?
Yes, how they used to invite people, witnesses, and of course, as you remember, I wrote extensively about the time of the royal wedding. Right, we had a series on our website.
Is this an official authorized biography?
I don't know if it's authorized, but it's a real book by a famous author and so on. And
not that I've ever known him to be shy about his UFO beliefs.
No, and he's always been quite upfront. And they mentioned stuff that, of course, we knew. I mean, certainly I knew, but it'll probably be a revelation to a lot of people that read the book, that he was a subscriber to Flying Saucer Review, the famous British magazine, that they even had witnesses come to Buckingham Palace to talk about UFOs.
Cool.
And then that he had all these generals, including Sir Peter Hursley, who was his equerry. Equerry is an old term in British royalty. Basically, it used to be a very important, it's like an aide, but equerry comes from equestrian, right, from horses. It was the guy in charge of the horses in the time of the kings, the Middle Ages. So it was an extremely important position because horses were transportation.
Yeah.
And the title remained, given that the royalties tradition.
Right.
So this one particular general, who's later general in the Royal Air Force, he even claims, and this was published in his own memoirs, but also in a book by Timothy Good, that he met a guy in an apartment in London that claimed that it was an extraterrestrial. And this guy at one time had the codes for the nuclear weapons in the UK. So
did they verify the codes were real? You probably wouldn't know.
The book, they quoted some official, unnamed official, saying, if only people had known that the guy that had the codes was seeing little green man. But of course, the man he saw was not little green man. These are the kinds of ridiculed statements. That was discussed, in fact, in the Nick Pope. Admitted that the MOD, the Ministry of Defense, as one way to minimize the importance of UFOs was
literally.
Right.
Little.
Yes, to belittle them, right? To call the witnesses UFO spotters and things like that. Little green man, and there's standard techniques, but it's just to say this is not so important.
Yeah.
However, when you read the files, you realize that it is important.
Yeah. Well, cool. We've got a couple other great stories to get to, but before we talk about that, I wanted to get into one at least. Before we went back and we got into a couple, but the couple of conferences that you went to just a few weeks ago.
Right.
Wasn't it two?
No, it was just one.
Okay.
I did go to another one, but that was although I guess it's been since we've done the radio show. That one was an interesting one. That was a few months ago. That was the one in San Marino.
Yeah, we talked about that one, but I wanted to talk about.
This one was a smaller one. It's the Mysteries of Space and Sky. And it was created by a professor at a college there in Arundel, Maryland. But it's connected now with MUFON, and my friends, Rob and Sue Swatek, they're the co-sponsors. But it's still somewhat connected to the college, although right now it's not at the college, but at a hotel.
It's so cool that a professor put it together.
And some of the students came. Some of his students came. And it was a one-day affair. It was just a couple of weeks ago.
Do you know what he teaches?
I guess science,
Okay,
but
cool.
I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
And but I guess it is. I guess it is science.
Mhm.
And so he's been pursuing this. But the college initially they did go along, but they were reluctant. So
Mhm.
finally they decided they were always putting too many obstacles. So finally they decided to just do it
I
done
see.
the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one day affair. It was not too big, but it was a very nice conference. And they had, a few of the local people from MUFON and so on in the Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland area. And the best known speaker, besides Open Minds, was George Knapp, of course, the KLS TV reporter.
Yeah.
And we've done his show in Coast to Coast many times. And he, of course, talked about the ranch, in Utah, the
Oh, okay.
Skinwalker Ranch,
Mm-hmm.
and it was quite fascinating.
Now, did you talk about Marquez there?
I don't believe I did.
No, because usually
no.
I know you like to cover a few subjects.
I did talk about a recent story that it was basically the same lecture it's sort of my official lecture, the one I did for the Congress,
Mhm.
the International Perspective of Ufology in the 21st Century, where I discussed the South American agencies, which I wrote extensively about both in the web and in the magazine. And a lot of the other stories I covered in the magazine, the Rockefeller Initiative, the Vatican, and the United Nations, a little bit about the French space program, UFO desk, and a couple
Cool.
of other things. But I did add one slide because I thought this was a significant story which somehow didn't catch as much attention as I would have hoped, which was the sighting that I discovered by Luis Echeverria, the former president of Mexico.
Right, that perfect segue into that. Going south of the border, let's head south and talk about this sighting. Because
Yeah.
It's funny. It's just like we're talking with Jason a minute ago and talking about these stories we're talking about now. I mean, these are the stories that should be getting a lot of attention by the press. You're talking about credible people and credible circumstances. It's really great stuff, but it really doesn't gain much ground.
No, because there's so much sensationalism and
Yeah.
bogus stories, floating around.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to
And,
make fun of. I don't like, as people know on the show, I don't like to make fun of people or anything. But I'll mention at least a story going around that just is so wild and out there, and
Mars?
it's like, yeah, it gets
Yeah.
attention. Obama, two people claiming that they spotted Obama on Mars.
I know.
I mean, come on.
And this is the kind of story that really kills the credibility of ufology.
Yeah.
I know it's a minority, but sometimes they're vocal and they're all over the web. And
But we have these, you don't even need to. We have all of these other great stories that I wish sometimes don't get the level of attention that something like this Obama Mars story gets. But let's talk about the president of Mexico and this story.
yeah, well, this of course Echeverria was with the PRI, the what is called the Revolutionary Institutional Party. Basically, it's a party that was created as a result of the Mexican Revolution, which ruled Mexico all throughout until Vicente Fox was elected. But once the elections became more democratic, finally they had it. But it's still a very prominent party, of course, in Mexico. And he was the president of Mexico in most of the 1970s. I know I remember you liked this part of the story. The story came through a prominent Mexican ufologist, very old now. He was the generation before Jaime Maussan. His name is Pedro Ferriz. And he used to be a famous broadcaster. In fact, he had been president of Mexico's National Association of Broadcasters at one time. And he had written many books on UFOs. He was, like I said, the main guy in Mexico in the 70s and 80s. Then Jaime came in the 90s. And he's still active, but he's very old now. So he was telling a story that when Echeverria was president, they used to have a breakfast, I don't know, every 6 months or so, with all the broadcasters. It was an informal meeting. It was not on the air, it was just for the president to meet all the broadcasters and I guess, discuss, what was going on in politics and in the country and so on. So they had this breakfast. I think it was in 1974. And Ferriz was, of course, there. And everybody knew that Ferris was involved in UFOs because he had been very vocal and had published books and done many radio programs and so on. So at one point, the subject of UFOs come into the conversation. And the other journalists are making light of the subject, they're like beginning to kind of make jokes. And it looked like it was going to go in that direction. And then the president says, "I've seen a UFO." And then everybody like stops, saying, is he kidding or what? And then he just straightforward tells a story that it was, he didn't give the date, and I had to kind of investigate and put it together. As it turned out, the sighting was in the 1960s when he was not the president, but he was the Minister of the Interior, which is the number 2 job in Mexico. There is no vice president in Mexico. So or Secretary of Government, actually, they call it in Mexico. So if something happens with the president, then the Secretary of Government becomes the president. So it's the number 2 job. And of course, after that, he became the president. So he was already an extremely prominent politician. And he was at a home that he owned in Cuernavaca. And he was there with his wife and with a lady whose name right now I forgot, but it's in our website story, who was the founder, was a prominent dancer, was the founder of the Mexico's National Ballet.
I'll look up the name here. I got it.
Amalia.
Amalia Hernandez.
Amalia Hernandez. Yeah, we have a nice picture of her dancing and everything. So they were there, and then suddenly there was a blackout in Cuernavaca. Everything went dark. And this is a little bit reminiscent, actually, of that famous story that we discussed in the program too, the one in Argentina. Remember at that town in Argentina when people saw the UFO near the dams?
Mm-hmm.
So same kind of thing. There's a blackout, and then the witnesses, in this case the president Amalia Hernandez, his wife, as well as the neighbor, see this cigar-shaped object on the sky. And it's there. They describe it. It says it was like an illuminated pen. Now, once I had to do a little bit of research on the web and also on my files to try to put together when was the date of this occurrence, because from the article it appeared that it had happened only like a couple of months before this breakfast. But as it turned out, the only case that was a blackout in Cuernavaca with a widespread UFO sighting was, I believe, in 1965. It's in the web article. And so it had to be that. And this sighting not only was seen by Echeverria and Amalia Hernandez, but also by everybody that it was somebody in that city, by the mayor, by the chief of the army in that area, and by the governor of the state, among others.
And they all saw this during the
They
blackout?
also did, yeah, because what happened is there were 2 events going on. One was a dinner at the Lions Club. So when things went dark, I guess people went outside to see what's going on, and there they saw it. And the other people, the governor and some of the other officials, were attending a special screening of a movie in a downtown theater in Cuernavaca. Obviously, the blackout happens, the movie is done, everything, the projection stops. So again, they go out and they see this thing. And this was reported in the press at the time, but not Echeverria's sighting. That because Echeverria was in his house and he didn't tell anybody at the time, or maybe he told his friends, but I mean he didn't tell any journalists or anything. So that story didn't go public until many years later, thanks to Ferris. So it's a great story.
When the story came out, was it a big deal in Mexico?
I don't think so. Ferris mentioned it in one of his books, but only in passing. Doesn't give any description. And then I discovered in the website, the official website of Mexico's Association of Broadcasters, he has a blog there, and he published it there. But I didn't see that it got picked up by a lot of people either. I found it by happenstance, as usually happens. I was looking for something else, and I saw the link, and I ended up in that story. Actually, I ended up in another website that had a mirror, had published that story, but only partially. So eventually, I found the actual official story, which again the link is in our website for those who read Spanish, and there it is. But no, I don't think it got a lot of attention, even in Mexico.
Is it Echeverria? Is that how you say it?
Echeverria.
Echeverria. Is he still alive?
I believe so.
Uh-huh.
I mean, as far as I could tell from the web, he's obviously very old now. But I couldn't see no obituary. He's still alive.
Yeah, that would be neat to see if you would talk about that again, because ex-presidents, of course, we have Grant Cameron and presidentialufo.com writing about the presidents. We've written all about
we
the
did
American presidents.
two American, right? Carter and Reagan. I mean, at least that are on the record.
Yeah. So it's interesting to have the Mexican president now, one of them. Do you know of any other Mexican presidents or having sightings?
No,
or
not
even South American presidents?
Well, there was a case with the president of Chile, Frey's son, because there was a Frey father also in the 1960s who was a famous president. So, but this one is interesting because they didn't really notice the UFO. What happened was that this was in the mid-90s. And I don't recall the exact date, but I have it in my files. And he had gone to some official duty in the south of Chile. And I guess they were opening a sports complex, I think. So they were playing soccer. And the president himself, went and was playing with the ball. And a lot of people were taking pictures because, I mean, when you get a chance to play soccer with the president, it doesn't happen every day.
Yeah.
So people were taking pictures of the scene rather than looking at the sky. When the pictures were developed, and what's interesting is that it appeared in all the different pictures taken by different photographers. So it was not a camera defect.
That's interesting.
And when the pictures were developed, you see the president here playing and all that, and sure enough, above in the sky, there's a UFO. And but he didn't see it. But later, in a famous TV program that was broadcast by the Chilean National UFO broadcast, which was a very large production. Actually, I worked on that too. I arranged all the American interviews for them. They interviewed President Frey, and he went on the record, and he told the story, and he said, no, I didn't see it, but the pictures were taken, and he said in the photos and the negatives, I guess those were still not digital cameras, were taken to the presidential palace, and they were looked by the photographic experts at the presidential palace.
Wow.
And as far as we know, it was a UFO. It was not identified.
Wow. What did the object look like?
It was not terribly detailed, but it was some kind of, I should publish it on the web. There you go.
Yeah, that's a great story.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will put it. I have several of the pictures. It made on the news in Chile eventually. It was published in various magazines and all that. And the fact that it was, and I have the statement from Frey in the interview that he did with Bañados, who's a famous TV broadcaster in Chile. So that's one. And there's others, but I know that Kubitschek, the famous president of Brazil, who was the founder of Brasilia. He's the one that conceived the idea of moving the capital to the interior of Brazil, because up to that point, Brazil had always existed around the coast, and the rest was just forest. So he was a very important figure in Brazilian history. I don't know that he had a UFO sighting, but he is the one, and this is well known, that released the Trindade Island photographs. The famous case, which to this day there's controversy.
Heavy debate.
Yeah, to this day, every so often someone comes and explains it as a hoax, but obviously not convincingly enough, because a year later someone else explains it as a hoax again, or someone defends it or whatever. But it was taken by this famous photographer, Baraúna, on board a Navy ship, a Brazilian Navy ship off Trindade Island. The ship was called the Almirante Saldanha. And it was seen by other witnesses. So even if the photos were a hoax, because Baraúna was a very skilled photographer, this was the argument, that he could have hoaxed it easily because he had the skills. But nevertheless, there was a sighting. So the sighting is still true, even if the photos were hoaxed. So at the time, I guess he gave the negatives and everything to the Navy. And the Brazilian Navy did a secret investigation. They were not released to the public. And they gave the dossier to the president. And the president said, this is too important to keep secret. I wish other presidents around the world would follow this. And he revealed it to the press. And he made front page headlines. And so he played an important role in ufology, but I don't know that he himself had a sighting. But he was definitely interested. And there are other cases like that, for sure.
So, and if people go to the Google Trinidad Island UFOs,
oh yeah,
you'll find it, and you'll probably, if you've been in this field or perused UFO photos like many of you have, you probably recognize it.
Oh
yes,
you've
seen it before.
Anybody that's been
popular
in this field is one of the most famous. And besides, we published a long story. Remember, because I discovered a document by Baraúna himself that was not even known in Brazil. What happened is he had written this 2-page statement, and sent it to my old buddy, and mentor, Coleman von Kavinsky in New York. And there's even a drawing and everything. And this was in Portuguese. And this, when I published it in our website, we translated it to English, but we also had the original document. It kind of caused a frenzy in Brazil, because here was an original document taken by written by the photographer that they had never seen.
Yeah.
So I was contacted, I remember, by Jebaer, and they asked permission to publish it and so on.
And I guess the photographer was a character, and he's not a credible person. And I guess, although they say he possibly used two spoons together, so it's a tough case.
It's a tough case. And there are these alleged confessions, but the confessions are always ambiguous, so who knows?
So the debate rages
on. The debate goes on.
Yeah, interesting. Great. Staying down south, but moving back into Mexico as we take our UFO travels around south of the border is some of, Jason and I again have talked about this in the last few shows because it's been a lot of news. This documentary on 2012.
Oh, the 2012,
You had done some investigation on that. And you also gave essentially in a nutshell how the 2012 phenomena came to be. So maybe let's talk about that first, the history of the 2012.
Well, really the history of the 2012, first of all, for those who don't know, although I guess by now most people should know, but the 2012 is the end of this cycle, right, of the Mayan calendar, which is the 5,200 or something, 5,000 and something cycle. And it's the end of the last Bactum. Bactum is 144,000 days, I believe. So it ends. And there's the one, of course, there are a million interpretations of what this means. And some people think it's the end of the world. Other people think aliens are going to land. Other people think that nothing's going to happen. And there's absolutely no agreement there. But there's one agreement, though. Everybody agrees that the mathematical calculation is correct, and that the calendar ends on late December of 2012. And that's just a mathematical thing. What does it mean? That is something else. I would say that this whole phenomenon, interesting enough, it was not started in Mexico, but it was started by gringos. It started in the United States. And now, of course, the Mexicans are going along because it's going to bring,
especially lately.
Yeah, it's going to bring the income for them. So they're definitely going along with it now. And in the article I wrote, I quoted extensively from a speech by Felipe Calderón, the current president of Mexico, about when he inaugurated the Mayan World program. And this is a big program to promote tourism, basically, and create infrastructure and everything, in the Mayan, what is called the Mayan Riviera area, which includes Yucatan and other states in Mexico, as well as Guatemala, Honduras, and Belize. And but to go back a little bit to the history of 2012, I think that the real pioneer of it was, and he passed away, I believe earlier this year, or maybe last year, but recently, it was a man called Jose Argüelles. You might have heard of him. He was a professor. And he was a man interested in consciousness raising and certainly a very forward-thinking type of person. And he came up with a concept back in 1988 called the harmonic convergence. And this was at the time presented as the beginning of the end, the beginning of the cycle that would culminate in 2012. Now, basically, Argüelles was more like a metaphysical character. In his opinion, even though he was not opposed to the idea of aliens, actually. In some of his writings, he did talk about aliens as well. But mainly what he was saying is that this is going to be a shift in consciousness for mankind, which still a lot of New Age people believe in.
Didn't that have to do with the coming of the age of Aquarius? Wasn't that somehow along
well,
with it?
It is somewhat related but different, because the age of Aquarius is based on the Western zodiac.
Oh, okay.
Which we received from the Greeks, which in turn the Greeks got it from the Babylonians, and probably goes all the way back to the Sumerians. But it is the Maya is a different tradition, unless you go with the ancient alien theory. Where
I thought the harmonic convergence had to do with that.
No, harmonic convergence was strictly with the Maya calendar.
So they don't have a song like the Aquarius one.
No.
This is a coming of I really want to
Besides
sing the song.
the age of Aquarius is only a change of era, whereas the Maya calendar is the bigger thing. It's the end of a whole cycle.
Yeah.
It would be equivalent in the astrological tradition, the Western astrological tradition, with what they call the Platonic year, and that is the complete cycle of the 12 houses. Once the 12 houses have gone by, which is about 25,000 years. Then, bang, that's the big cycle. And the minor cycle is a change of era, though it's still a big thing because it's over 2,000 years.
And then you get the song. This
Yeah.
is the coming
And
of
there's
the
also, there's
age
because of this
Aquarius.
phenomenon of precession, it's not an exact thing. It takes over a period of like 100 years, 150 years for an era to change into another. It's sort of a phasing in.
So the harmonic convergence.
Convergence.
What was that?
Well, that was, like I said, the beginning of the cycle, of the final cycle that would end in 2012. So it's a cycle between 1988 and 2012. And among others, the person that was very much into this was Shirley MacLaine.
Right.
And I remember I had a connection. That's how I came to meet her, because Shirley MacLaine we had a friend in common, which was this astrologer, Marcello Galuppi, who also passed away, who's a very well-known astrologer, great astrologer. That's why she was using it. And she was giving her seminars on raising consciousness, her New Age seminars back then, which used to attract thousands of people. But then she decided that this was taking too much of her attention, so she stopped and went back to making movies, although she remained interested personally. But at that time, she was really becoming like a guru, like a New Age guru. So this was 1988, and she asked Marcello Galuppi to give a little talk as part of her seminar. This was at the Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan, to talk about the harmonic convergence. So he did. And as a result that he was appearing there as a guest speaker, he said, you can bring whoever friends you want. So he called me, I remember, so you want to go to the Shirley MacLaine, which it used to cost hundreds of dollars, back then. So you want to come to Shirley MacLaine? Sure, I said, I want to come, of course. And that's how, and then at the end of the seminar, we all ended up at her apartment with Sitchin. And remember, we had the picture of Zachariah Sitchin. And
Got that in our Hollywood magazine.
Right, in our Hollywood magazine, in the profile I wrote about her. So that's basically it. And since then, of course, in 1988, of course, 212 was still too much in the future, so people weren't talking too much. But although some people were still researching it. But then came 2000. There was a lot of expectation for 2000. Remember, the end of the world, the UFOs are going to land, et cetera, et cetera.
Computers were all going to be
computers
screwed.
And of course, none of that happened. And so then, after that was done, then what's the next, doomsday date? The Maya calendar. And that became big. And then that's when that whole movement started. And people started writing books. And actually, Colin Andrews, the prominent crop circle researcher, was one of the first ones who wrote a book for the Idiot's Guide. This came a few years ago. And of course, he's going to be a speaker at our Congress.
Our chance to plug the Congress. So remember, the UFO International UFO Congress. So
right.
I got that backwards. In late February, you can go and register right now. And Colin Andrews is not only speaking about crop circles.
No.
He's also going to be part of a panel to talk about 2012.
Correct.
Because he literally wrote the Dummy's Guide.
He does, yeah, exactly.
That's so funny, too, because he's a crop circle guy, but he wrote the
But
Dummy's
he was
Guide to
always
2012.
interested in consciousness, too, and I think it's one of his angles now on crop circles as well.
And I'm sure Jaime will talk about that.
Oh,
because
yes.
Jaime Musan's really into, especially lately, and he talked about this last time at the Congress, about crop circles and their relation to 2012.
Correct. Yeah, Jaime is a total believer in 2012, and he thinks that something big is going to happen, and it's going to be connected with aliens and
the Mayans.
and the
crop
Mayans and change.
circles.
Of course, what's interesting, and I pointed out in my story, because these people that are doing the movie or the documentary, which are the sons of two famous people. One is Julia Levy, who is the son of the late actor Raúl Julia, and the other one is Juan Carlos Rulfo, who's a Mexican guy who's a director. Julia Levy is a producer. And Rulfo is the son of Juan Rulfo, who's a very prominent Mexican writer. very well known in Latin culture. One of the big writers, also the same generation of Garcia Marquez, and so these people have been putting these press releases through this outfit in Hollywood, the Rap. It's called the Rap. And they're basically hyping, the story, saying that they're going to have all these revelations from the Mexican government about secrets that the Mexican government has been holding. And at least they have one official that's gone along, which is the Minister of Tourism in Campeche State, which is kind of a young guy, a maverick guy. And I think he's gone along because he said, hey, what the hell? I'm the Minister of Tourism. This is going to bring people. But the more you look at it, I don't believe it. Mexico has a very strong archaeological community for the reason that they have such fascinating ruins, and such an important ancient history. So they got all these institutes are funded by the government. Many of them are connected to the UNAM, which is the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and they have all these prominent archaeologists. And they, along with the archaeologists in the United States and Britain and elsewhere, they're very skeptical of this whole 2012 phenomenon. The official view of mainstream is that it's just like a switch over. You end the cycle. It's like a restart in your computer. You end the cycle and it starts again.
Like December 31st to January 1st.
Right. That's what the official Mexican archaeological people are saying.
And
now,
NASA.
And NASA as well. Now, if the Mexican government had artifacts or things like that, which is what the people in these press releases are saying, why release it through a documentary done by Americans? It doesn't make sense. They would go through their own archaeological community, would be properly vetted according to, to procedures for archaeological discoveries. Obviously, they're getting some support because that movie is part of the Mayan World program, and in the sense that they are allowing them to film in ruins, and they're allowing them to film in certain, any monument in the world, or museum for that matter, always have areas that are off the public, right? There are always areas, when you go to Palenque or any of these cities, Maya cities, some of which I have visited, you can see some pyramids and things, but others you can't because the archaeologists are working or they're under repair or whatever. And same thing in museums. Museums have basements, right, full of stuff that is not in public view. So I think that in that sense, yes, they are getting cooperation from the Mexican government to allow them to film in certain locations and to maybe film certain artifacts that are not on public display. But that they're going to reveal big alien secrets, I don't think so. In fact, they also quoted the Minister of Tourism from Guatemala. It's not called the Ministry of Tourism, but the Tourism Institute, National Institute, something like that. But it would be equivalent to Ministry of Tourism. A man called Novielo, I think is his name. And this happened after I published my two-piece series, although I probably will do an update on that. And basically, the guy, he was quoted also saying that the Guatemalan government also had secrets that were going to be released in the movies. And the guy came with a statement, with a public statement in Spanish, of course, saying, "I never said such thing."
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have no, we don't have any secrets about aliens or whatever. So.
So I didn't know about that. That's a bad sign.
Yeah, that was denied. Not the Minister of Tourism in Mexico on Campeche, not the whole state of, not the whole country, but Campeche. He didn't deny it. So obviously he did say those statements.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it is interesting that at least I haven't seen yet that. They made some pretty lofty claims of what Stephen Hawking had said.
Right.
Or according to them, and there hasn't been a denial out of Hawking's camp, but that he said something like, well, even if these aliens were talking, something more like, although the aliens were talking to the Mayans, doesn't mean that if they were their friends, they're going to be our friends, and we still have to be careful, which doesn't actually sound like. He doesn't talk like that, really.
Right. But it goes a little bit along with his, remember his famous statement that aliens are if they exist, they're some kind of scavengers or something.
Yeah.
Well, they claim, these guys, Julia and Rulfo, that they're going to be interviewing all these prominent people,
Yeah.
including members of the church and former presidents, and But I mean, I'm sure they will interview a lot of people, but they're also hyping it,
Yeah.
which is like what any movie producer would do. I mean, there's nothing
Yeah.
unusual about that.
What I'm really worried about is that this is going to be a fourth kind situation where they're making all this stuff up for some viral marketing, and then later on it turns out that it's not actually a real documentary,
Right.
but kind of a mockumentary.
It could be.
And if that happens, the thing is that lots of people in the 2012 community will get real upset. But the general public really doesn't, people will think, oh, what a great marketing scheme.
Yeah, I hated that fourth kind thing, I don't mind, even if you're going to be sensationalist or whatever, but at least be clear, Well, this is a documentary, or this is fiction, or hype it, whatever. That goes with the territory. But to pretend that you're doing a documentary when it's a fictional movie, because it just confuses people.
Yeah.
It confuses the people, not the researchers who are familiar with the subject, but the general public,
Yeah.
and then it just muddles the water, and then you don't know what's true, what's false.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I hope it won't be something like that, but I
Yeah.
guess we won't know.
Yeah, we won't know, but it's really interesting. Getting back to the Mexican president talking about the Mayan stuff, didn't they even put something about that in their press release?
Well, they did talk about the end of the calendar, yes.
Uh-huh.
And even in this official speech, which we quoted extensively in my article, and we also have the link to the actually the presidential website in Mexico with the actual speech, but in Spanish. And he did talk he did address the end of the Maya calendar. And didn't talk about aliens, though. But he did talk about the end of the Maya calendar and saying, well, many people are... But even there, you could see the PR angle. It said many people are, in great expectation about the end of the Maya calendar. So come to Mexico, our doors are open. See it from here where it all happened,
Yeah.
So I don't blame the Mexican government.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was, the Minister of Tourism, I would do exactly the same thing. It's a great hype. They didn't even created it. They're just going along, and why not?
No, for sure, because, even though I don't think anything catastrophic is going to happen, I agree that it'll probably just be what it is originally. I think even intended by the Mayans, it's just a change of the calendar, like December to January. But it would be really cool, and I would love to be at some Mayan ruin,
sure.
on New Year's when that happens, just for fun and just to be there.
Well, there is a sociological aspect, I
Yeah.
mean, and I don't completely rule out that at a subtle level there might be some change of consciousness or something, because a 5,000-year cycle, that is something.
Yeah.
But where there's a lot of confusion, too, is in what the so-called Mayan prophecies, right? A lot of people talk about the Mayan prophecies. But the calendar is not a prophecy. The calendar is a strictly mathematical thing. And of course, the Mayas were famous for both their astronomy and their mathematics. One of the things that, in fact, the Mexican president mentioned is that they invented the number 0. That was an invention by the Mayas. The Romans didn't have number 0. I think in India also they did it simultaneously. But the Mayas came up on their own with the number 0. So this whole thing is a mathematical construct. Now, there are some real Mayan prophecies too, but not in the sense that people are writing. They're more like cosmological things, and they're compilations usually put down in the colonial period. And one is known as the Book of Chilam Balam, and the other one is known as the Popol Vuh. These are two books written in Maya Quiche language and put together in the 18th century, 17th century by Mayas themselves, but already in colonial times. Other than that, there are the codices, the famous codices, but there are only about 4 or 5 that are left. I mean, maybe there was a book of prophecies, but as we know, unfortunately, the Spanish priests burned them all, except a couple that were survived and were sent to European museums, and now they're in Dresden and Madrid and so on. But unfortunately, because it was a method, in their conquest.
So there really are no doomsday prophecies.
No, and there are, in some of the Mayan codices, there are astrological predictions, but they're much shorter term. There are certainly no doomsday prophecies. No.
And that's the most difficult part, because you hear all about these doomsday prophecies. You have the 2012 movie,
Right.
all about this doomsday stuff, which is really
Yeah,
fiction
even
or-
though in Mayan history there is a doomsday, there are two doomsdays as far as they're concerned. The first one is the most mysterious. It happened around the year 900 AD and is the end of the classical Mayan civilization. And as you know, for some reason, which science and astronomy and archaeology, they don't know yet for sure what happened, they abandoned all their cities.
Yeah, it just kind of took off.
Yeah, it's not like the people left, because the people are there to this day, but their political construct collapsed. That's why the cities were so well preserved, because they abandoned them, and then they were eaten by the jungle, and they were rediscovered right after. But the Spanish never destroyed them, because by the time the Spanish came in 600 years later, they were gone. So then you have the new civilization, the new Maya civilization, which was with an influx from the Toltecs from Mexico. They joined hands with whatever was left of the Mayas, and they created a new Maya civilization. And this is connected with that great mysterious character, sort of a Mexican messiah, Quetzalcoatl, which also gets mentioned in the 2012, the return of Quetzalcoatl, all that, which Cortés used cleverly, the Spanish conquistador. As soon as he arrived, he heard from the people he was conquering, and well, actually he had a mistress, Malinche. It's a famous character in Mexican history. And because she was his interpreter, but she also became his mistress. Because you have to understand that the Aztecs had subdued a lot of people too, and they were using them for their human sacrifices and things like that. So when the Spanish came, many of the other subdued nations, they saw them as saviors, actually. Here were people that were, basically liberating them from their masters. So they went along, and that's why Cortés, who had a very small army, suddenly had thousands of Indians fighting for him too. So he learned about these prophecies of Quetzalcoatl, that Quetzalcoatl, this prophet from the ancient days, was supposed to return. And he had come from the west, and he was bearded. And Cortés, being a ruthless but a very clever guy, he immediately saw the potential.
And a sun god, and so
Yes.
Cortés had his armor that glistened.
Exactly. Plus, of course, they had fire weapons,
Yeah.
firearms, and they had horses. And the horses terrified the Mexicans. And I did, as you know, a lot of research on this, because I wrote, this was in the early issues of the magazine, and I will be talking about this in my next presentation in the Congress, among many other things. I did this article about the portents and the omens at the end of the Aztec Empire, and how there was really what today we would call a UFO wave in the 1500s. And it was seen as portents of doom, and indeed doom did come. Whatever you believe about comets or UFOs or end of calendars or something, certainly doom came for the Mexican culture at that time, So that's another angle, this return of Quetzalcoatl.
Yep.
And so on. And it's a fascinating subject. So regardless of what's going to happen in 2012, I'm doing already a lot of research, because I find it very interesting.
Yeah. So I can't blame the marketing people and the tourist people, because it's a great place, and it's that's all about marketing, reminding people that it's fascinating, the history, and to come back. And like you said, it is a common misunderstanding that the Mayans disappeared.
Yes.
They didn't disappear.
No.
They're still there.
They're still there.
If you go to these ruins, some of the people selling you stuff are Mayans.
When you go to Guatemala, my sister was with the UN in Guatemala, and I actually did visit Guatemala in the 1990s. I learned that there are 24 Indian nations, as they call them, but they're all descended from the Mayans. But by now, they even have different dialects and everything.
Wow.
And so, yes, the people are all there. But the political system, of course, crumbled. And then it crumbled again when the Spanish conquered them in the 1500s. That was the collapse of the second Mayan civilization. But the people, obviously, were still there, and they're still there to this day. So, and then the other thing, and it's a little bit of PR here for Mexico. I know a lot of people are very afraid about violence and all that.
Oh, yeah.
But that's in the north of Mexico. When you go to Cancun and Campeche, these areas, that's not where all this business of the drug lords and all that is going on. And those areas are much better policed, because tourism is a huge income for Mexico. So I'm sure that it'll be fairly safe.
Yeah. Well, cool. We've only got a few minutes left, but so I wanted to maybe talk about what you're working on now for the next issue of the magazine.
Yeah, I got a couple
Kinda
of
plug that for a little
got
bit.
a couple of interesting stories. One is one that I combined some articles that I had done on the web, but put them all together in a single piece, and it's about, of course, the MOD, the Ministry of Defense files, but not so much on the UFO cases themselves, but the politics. What was the politics going on? And particularly, I profiled three people. One is Lord Hill Norton, the former Admiral of the Fleet, who at one time was the chairman of the NATO military commander, prominent man, who became really a pioneer in exopolitics, what today we call exopolitics. In the late 90s, in early part of the last decade, he passed away in 2004, he became a formidable fighter for ufology. And he kept pestering the Ministry of Defense, because at that time the Ministry of Defense had not put in place their declassification policy. So he was, and especially he was interested in the Rendlesham Forest case of December 1980. He wanted the answers on that. And he was a member of parliament and a former defense chief. So these guys of MOD were basically terrified by him, and he wouldn't take no for an answer, this guy. I mean, so the usual, passing the buck wouldn't work with him. So he would come back, and this went on over and over. And then the other character, which actually, Hill Norton I never met, but the other one I did, was Ralph Noyes. Fascinating character. He had worked at Ministry of Defense for many years. He retired with the rank of Undersecretary of State. And he, too, at one time was involved in the UFO investigation in the 1970s. And he described in a famous memorandum that was in the last release an event that happened where at the time he worked at MOD, when they all went to a theater that it was at the sub-basement of the ministry, and they saw this, 20-minute or so presentation that someone at the ministry had put together of UFO footage, both pictures, including gun camera film, which you always hear about it, but you never see. And he wrote this at the time that our friend Nick Pope was the guy in charge of the UFO desk. So Nick immediately said, hey, film, gun camera, hey, let's get our hands on. He couldn't find it.
Yeah.
It was just vanished off the face. And obviously it existed because Noyes is a very credible source. And so in 1970, this presentation was put together and this footage existed. By the time Nick tried to get his hands on, 24 years later, it was gone. So that article deals with that.
Just like a lot of this stuff, they claim that the government these guys didn't think it was very important,
right.
So they threw it out when they
they
were
would
getting
not,
rid
they
of
would
old
not
files.
not film.
But that's the thing
Yeah.
that when you hear that answer, sometimes I think, okay, well, maybe that makes sense. Like when Leslie Keane and the Coalition for the Freedom of Information looked for information from NASA, it was thrown out. We tried our best to find it. But when you hear that answer over and over again, it's like,
I can
come
see
on,
in
guys.
some cases it might be true. If it's one document, one memo, sure, it got misplaced, it got misfiled. It's the people in government are human. They can make mistakes. But a whole thing with film and footage, even though Noyes says it was not dramatic, he said it was not that great. But still, I don't believe they would throw away gun camera footage. No way. And the other story is a fascinating story in the history of ufology too. Which I also wrote in the web, but this is
just a couple seconds.
Yeah, it's on the famous Pascagoula abduction of 1973.
Right.
The Charlie Hickson case, and Hickson and Parker. So but their magazine article will go into other aspects that are not in the web article. It will discuss, for instance, a wave of USOs that took place at the same time.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Perfect, because Charlie Hickson passed away recently, and so there was a lot of news about the Pascagoula case. So, but just very light couple paragraphs on it. So you'll have a story coming out that'll cover it more in depth.
And putting it in context.
Yeah.
Because it didn't happen in a void, It was part of the 1973 wave, which was an extremely significant UFO wave. So
that's pretty dang exciting.
People should look forward to it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for updating us on these stories and coming back on the show again.
You're welcome, Alejandro.
It's always great.
Anytime.
one of my favorite researchers, Antonio Huneeus. I love his work and the stuff that he writes. But we are out of time. Be sure to join us next week on Open Minds. Be sure to check out openminds.tv. And again, if you want that Twitter feed of news stories at UFO Daily News on Twitter, and you could see this UFO news that's coming out on a regular basis, including all of these web stories, information on when the radio show is coming up and who the guests are, and also, of course, when the magazine is coming out and the latest and the greatest on the International UFO Congress. So check out openminds.com to keep up to date. Thank you all for listening, and don't forget to join us next week. Adios, muchachos.